Go sideways, go backwards, go inside out and upside down. Innovation is a matter of looking at things from many different directions, not just the straight ahead drive to the goal line. Bring together diverse design teams. As my friend Carol Moore is fond of saying, none of us is as smart as all of us. None of us has the view of the whole by itself. And so in the diversity of a very mixed team, you find solutions emerge that wouldn't emerge from a narrow group of specialists. Fundamental is to be clear about the design criteria that meet the goals. What are the goals that you're looking for? How do you know you're going to get to them? What are they sufficient to the challenge? And we're in a time where I would argue that 2% reduction in waste or 10% reduction in waste or 30% improvement in energy efficiency are woefully inadequate goals to the challenge that we face, which is nothing less than reinventing the industrial economy of a planet, and to create an industrial economy that operates in harmony with the laws of nature that sustain it. And fundamentally, we need to learn to focus on the how-to rather than the why we can't. When President Kennedy in the early 1960s charged NASA to land a man on the moon within 10 years and bring him back alive, NASA actually didn't have the technology to do the mission. And they had the choice of going to the president and saying, sir, this is impossible. You have to go on international TV and say, I made a mistake. But what they actually did was they did two remarkable innovations in not technology, but in organizational development. Day one of the Apollo mission, they held a victory party and congratulated themselves on the successful moon mission, and then proceeded to reverse engineer the mission from success backwards to the now. And the second thing they did was create a department of it can't be done, so that every time an impossible technological task came up, insulation of the capsule, adhesives, guidance systems, food, waste management, and so forth, they turned the impossibility into a design specification, took that across the hall figuratively to the department of it can't be done, said, please invent this for us. And sometimes a day later and sometimes 6 months later, they came back and said, here's what you asked for. 3,000 times in the course of the Apollo mission. Don't ask why we can't. Ask how do we do it. And as people talked about last night, innovation can be a disciplined process. It can be systematic. It can be highly productive. You've seen the examples again and again of folks who've done this. And the key to this is engaging your people, not top-down, but through collaboration. Collaboration rules. It's something that you do with your people, not to them, greening your business. It involves getting everybody on the same page, asking a parallel set of questions with a common language, and engaging people at all levels. Champions, skunkworks, green teams, well, you can see the list here. Many different ways to go at this, to get involvement up and down the ladder, not just from the specialists, but we found in many cases with appropriate orientation and grounding and sustainability frameworks, janitors, chambermaids, secretaries, people on the loading dock are as much of a source of innovation as engineers and product managers and people who are facing the customer. Engage everyone on everything early in the process. Learning rather than training. Getting everyone on the same page through frameworks like Natural Step or Natural Capitalism or Cradle to Cradle, so there's a common language. Listen to your employees. There's a gold mine on the front line. And in many organizations, these folks are disparaged, but we've seen in Scandic Hotels and IKEA and Federal Express and any number of companies, properly equipped and listened to people who are face to customer on the front line are a powerful source of innovation. Communicate the results and share the controls. And control is a really key issue here. J.M. Juran, who is one of the founders of Total Quality Management, along with W. Edwards Deming, said in 1948, said that to be in a state of self-control, a person needs three things. They need to know what's expected of them. They need to know how they're doing on meeting what's expected of them. And they need to know what resources they have available to do differently if that's required. And here's a preview of the power of and. Juran said in 48, if any of these three conditions aren't met, a person can't be held responsible. How many of you have all three in your organization? The lights are low, but I see basically no hands up. Typical. We've never seen more than 5% of the hands go up in any room where we ask this question. How many of you have at least two of the three? About a quarter of you. Pretty typically. And how many of you have at least one of the three in your organization? Look around the room and notice that not every hand is up. Every hand should be up at least for one of these. Actually, if we're going to be effective, it should be up for all three. And this is typical in world-class organizations that we work with in every industry, in NGOs and in government. The minimum conditions for accountability and responsibility and effective operation are lacking. So one of the keys to that, another place that we focus, is real-time dashboards that provide that clear line of sight so that you know, see the goals, see your impacts, and see the effects that your actions have on moving the needle there. So in planning for the futures, and I say futures, not future, because we are facing multiple futures with great uncertainty, with unpredictability at every turn. Nobody can tell us what this is going to look like, well, a month from now, much less a year from now. Think back 1 month. The Gulf of Mexico wasn't covered with oil. Think how rapidly things change in this world. So planning for these futures, we need to be lean and green. We need to face reality. And what I mean by that is the physics that underlies the chemistry, that underlies the biology, that underlies the ecology, that underlies the human economy. We tend to focus on the money numbers in business, but there's a stack of dependency here. And unless we understand the science that all this stands on, we don't understand how to do business in a way that's sustainable economically in the long term, as well as sustainable ecologically in the long term. You need to engage everyone, need to measure the right things, and really set your sights to be great, not just to be good, not just to be better, but to be stunningly great, because that's the world requires nothing less, and frankly, your markets require nothing less. Customer expectations are changing rapidly, and whether you are consumer-facing yourselves or selling through an organization like Walmart, you know that the mind of the market is moving very rapidly here. And if you live in a world of responding to those changes, you're going to be too late at every turn. The challenge is to anticipate those, get ahead, know, as Wayne Gretzky used to say, skate to where the puck is going, and be ahead of the game and be ahead of the regulations, in fact. We advise our clients to ignore the regulations because there's no guidance system for business in a regulation. That's a minimum condition for being in the game. It's not a destination or a guide to leadership. The principles you know. They're very simple. We need to be 100% renewable energy powered in this economy, zero waste, no persistent toxics. How do we know this? Because that's what lives in nature. You know, the 3.8 billion years of game plan tells us this. No, short loops of physical distribution, flat hierarchical structures, the guidance is there. How do we adapt this into our world, into the cultures that we've evolved, and do it in a way that meets the business demands of profitability and shareholder value and so forth? We know that the best approaches are systemic, not piecemeal. They're strategic rather than merely operational. They're integrated with the business agenda. They're not environmental or CSR or social responsibility. They're business core at every turn. And they're focused on meeting not just shareholder needs, but stakeholder needs. A lot of people still seem to think, Milton Friedman, I think, was quoted last night, seem to think that maximizing return to shareholders is the purpose of doing business. Ask any 100 people on the street or any business conference, and that's the answer that you'll get. But the fact is that's not the purpose of doing business. A.P. Giannini, who founded the Bank of America not far from here 125 years ago, said the purpose of the bank is not to maximize return to shareholders. It's to provide credit facilities to immigrant communities in San Francisco who don't have access to credit. And he said, if we do that well, we will make boatloads of money. I don't think boatloads was the term he used, but that was the idea. And look at Bank of America 125 years later. You hear this from Kip Tindall of the Container Store. You hear this from John Mackey of Whole Foods. You hear this from Peter Drucker throughout the 20th century. The purpose of business is what you're there to do. If you do it well, you make money. Money is a way of keeping score. Money is a way of paying for the light bill as well as paying for the shareholders. Nobody thinks that the purpose of the business is to pay for the electricity. Why should it be to pay for the capital? It's a cost of doing business. We're there to do what we're there to do. So the power of and, I want to raise a warning about this. I'm going to go a little bit off the catechism for this conference for a moment here and suggest that the power of and is not about compromise. It's not about settling for never saying or, always saying and, finding the way to do both. Well, let me put it this way. It's not about settling for that. It's not about finding the least miserable, the least unacceptable, the least uncomfortable to each side, politically acceptable compromise. It's about innovation, as we've been saying. There's a kind of leadership that leads out of compromise. Let people talk, find out what's acceptable, and then take that forward. There's a kind of leadership that leads into compromise that says, here's what we need to accomplish. Let's bring together the requisite variety of people into the room and say, stay in this room until you figure out how to get this done. This is the kind of leadership that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was famous for during his term. Elizabeth Doty has just come out with a book on the myth of compromise that lays out some of the concerns about looking to compromise too early. In fact, what we need is leadership. We need clear direction set, powerful direction set that really challenge us to take the power of and use it to elevate the conversation into something new. We need to shift from that common business question of what's in it for me to the question of what are you really here to do? And this is a question that we ask all of our clients at a personal level and a corporate level. And people say, what do you mean? Do you mean in my job? Well, yeah, but not only. They say, do you mean in my family, in my community, in my purpose in life? This is the analog to A.P. Giannini's question that I have for each of you, which is, what are you really here to do? What would success really look like? Not just in your current job, but in your career, in your life on this planet, in your relationship in communities. What would it really look like? What really motivates you? And part of the power of and is to bring that fully into the work that you do. Not leave your soul at home when you go to work, but bring yours and the full soul and commitment and passion of everyone in your organization to the table from day one all the way through. Think big. What's your company really here to do? What do your customers really care about? Which guides you to what value you can really provide them. This is the key to the product to service shift that so many of you are talking about. How can your business do more with less? Really key, how good is good enough? Don't settle. And what big audacious goals can you publicly commit to as an organization and as a person? Let's just skip through those for a moment. What if these goals were really big? What if we faced some inconvenient truths? What are we really here to do? How good are we willing to have it? And really key, are you willing to put your money as well as your mouth where your heart is? For all that we talk about here, the game happens at cash registers every day across the country. We vote every day. We vote for the world that we will inherit and that our children will inherit. And getting the prices right and making those economic decisions at every turn is fundamental to producing what we're trying to produce here together. So the question I have for you is, will you escape into resignation of, oh, I can only do so much, or will you really raise the challenge in every conversation here for the next 3 days to what I think is the goal behind everything that we're talking about, learned from my mentor Buckminster Fuller 40 years ago when I started this work, is how do we create a world that works for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. It's a big goal. It's a worthy goal. The thing about the power of and is that and is really challenging sometimes. Sometimes there are choices to be made. This is our world. This is our world. The instruction last night was to, whenever you hear or, look for and. Sometimes it's or. Sometimes we have to make hard choices and go one way and not the other, and this may be one of those times in human history. So I want you to make those choices. I want you to embrace the power of and I want you not to be blind to the power of or, to the power of sometimes saying, no, not this way, we're going that way. Who's with us?